The marching tenors and the marching bass drum both have a unique set of difficulties for young percussionists. Not only are the instruments cumbersome, but they are also played in ways that are contrary to many other percussion instruments. The good news is that there are some equivalencies that we can find to utilize the transfer of learning. Some of the skills developed through learning the timpani can be applied to playing the tenors, and the concert bass drum has a very clear physical connection to the marching bass drum. Remember to always work to highlight these connections in your teaching. There's never enough time to rehash information that could be transferred from previous experiences. The more skills you can build onto each other, the better your percussionists will be able to smoothly transfer between instruments throughout the year. Before getting into the specifics of the tenors and the bass drum, I want to take a moment to talk about carrying marching drums. These drums are heavy and can cause difficulties for young students. Like I mentioned in a previous lesson, be sure to take into account the size and weight of each instrument before you assign parts for the marching season. A simple way that you can assess this is by including a movement portion in your audition. Just have your students wear the drum they would like to audition on and have them take 16 steps forward or backward while playing an exercise. You will quickly be able to tell if a student will be able to handle long marching rehearsals and performances. After you have assigned drums to your students, be sure that you assign harnesses as well. Modern marching snare drum harnesses, which are also called carriers, can be adjusted in many ways to fit students of different body types. Take the time to adjust each harness to each student and be sure that they all know which harness is theirs for the year. This will avoid a number of technique and movement problems before you even play a single note together as a drumline. A student with a harness that is not adjusted properly can experience severe discomfort when carrying the drum and could easily injure themselves during rehearsal. Keep in mind that carriers for snares, tenors, and basses will be constructed slightly differently from each other, and each manufacturer has a different design that they use. Be sure to spend some time with your harnesses so that you understand how to adjust them when needed. Here are 3 steps that can help guide you when adjusting marching carriers. Number 1, adjust the width of the shoulders to fit comfortably on the student. This adjustment is usually a simple nut and bolt on each side of the top of the harness. Be sure the shoulders are wide enough for the student to fit their head between and narrow enough that it doesn't fall off of the student. Number 2, adjust the belly plate so that it lands on the student's stomach. On most harnesses, this distance can be adjusted in 2 places, here and here. Have the student stand with just the harness on and adjust until the belly plate lands on their stomach. Too low and the harness will hit their upper thigh when walking, and too high and you may not be able to adjust the drum to the proper height. Number 3, adjust the height of the drum. To do this, adjust the height here or here to move the drum up or down. I usually have the student put the harness on with the drum and go to their playing position. I can make a note of how far up or down the drum needs to move and then adjust the harness when it's disconnected from the drum. The last thing I'll mention here are the marching drum stands. These heavy pieces of hardware are great to use during long rehearsals. You will get more focus and energy out of the students if they do not have to hold their drums for hours at a time. The issue with marching drum stands is that they are expensive and can be cumbersome. They are usually built for strength because they do need to hold up heavy equipment for long periods of time. Instead of purchasing proper stands, some directors let their students play with the drums on the floor or a table. The problem with these options is that they encourage poor technique. If the students are spending time working on playing these instruments, the best option is to have them play on the drums in the proper playing position at all times. Just be sure that each student sets up their stand so that the drum is in an identical position as it would be if they were carrying it. Now let's talk about performance techniques specific to the marching tenors. First, note that the alterations we made for the marching snare drum technique apply here as well. Be sure to close the gaps in the grip without squeezing and start and end with the stick down. That being said, the main complexity of playing the tenors is striking all of the drums in quick succession. The first thing that will help us here is to look at playing areas. On the tenors, the desired sound is a pitched and resonant sound. This is achieved by striking close to the edge of each drum. You can probably guess how the tenors sound when struck towards the center. Thuddy and dry, just like the timpani. Take a look at this diagram. We generally refer to the smallest drum in the main arc of the tenors as drum 1, the largest as drum 4, and the ones between as drums 2 and 3. You will notice that by striking all of the drums closer to the edges, the sticks do not have to move quite as far horizontally. This is a great concept to emphasize to your students. It's easier to play the tenors correctly than incorrectly. One exception to this rule is for the small drums outside of the main arc of the tenors. We call these Spock drums or shot drums. These drums are so small and tuned so high that there really isn't any resonance to be had. Go ahead and strike these drums towards the center, avoiding clipping the rims as you move around the drums. Now, when moving around the drums, it is important to keep the thumbs turned inward. It's very easy for tenor players to reach for drums 3 or 4 by rotating the forearm and turning the thumb out. This will cause a number of technique issues and should be avoided. Be sure to pivot from the elbow when striking the outer drums. I'd like to mention 2 tenor-specific performance techniques that are commonly used. First is the crossover. Just like on the timpani, the crossover can be used to facilitate a quick shift around the drums. In addition, crossovers on the tenors can be used for visual effect. When crossing, be sure to keep the wrists low to avoid striking the drums at a steep angle. Here are some examples of the proper hand position for crossovers on the tenors between 2 drums. When we cross to an adjacent drum, the sticks alone should cross. When skipping over a drum during a crossover, the wrists will cross as well. Notice also how the thumbs stay facing inward at all times. The second tenor-specific technique is the sweep. This is a technique where a double or triple stroke is performed on 2 adjacent drums. The sweep is sometimes also used in conjunction with the crossover to create complex flourishes on the tenors. Be sure to practice this technique slowly at first to avoid striking the rims of the drums. You can use any of the 3 double stroke techniques, wrist-wrist, drop squeeze, or double bounce, to perform a sweep. Lastly for today, let's take a look at the marching bass drum technique. Just as with the tenors, make the same adjustments to grip and stroke that are made on the marching snare drum. One other simple change comes here with the bass drum. Slide your hand all the way back on the end of the mallet. This will provide a bit more leverage as the stick moves into the drum head. Pull back just far enough so that you can't see any of the butt end of the mallet peeking out under the palm. Now for the big change. The bass drum is held vertically instead of horizontally. This is vastly different from almost anything that we have discussed up to this point in this course. The closest we have come is the concert bass drum. There are a number of different ways to play the marching bass drum, just as with everything else in this course. I am sharing what has worked for me with my students, which doesn't mean something else can't work in another situation. Take this technique, try it out, and see if it works for your students. It might be just what they need, which is great. If it doesn't work, then go find someone else teaching something different and try that. Then find another person and try that. Eventually, you'll retire content that you were always looking for the best possible way to serve the musical development of your students. The first issue that I address when starting new students on the marching bass drum is drum height. Have each student hold a pair of marching bass drum mallets, relax their arms to their sides, bend from the elbow so that the forearm is parallel to the floor, and then turn their thumb upward. In this position, there should be a 135-degree angle between their forearm and the mallet shaft. Now, adjust the harness of each student so that the center of the bass drum meets the head of the mallet. Do not adjust the student's position. Move the drum to the student, not the student to the drum. The stroke for the marching bass drum is significantly different than that of the snare drum or the tenors. Start with the forearm parallel to the floor and the thumbs turned upward. From here, turn the forearm outward and pivot from the elbow. The wrist should bend back as well. The palm should now be facing upward with the mallet perpendicular to the drum head. From here, move back inward, striking the drum. Let me demonstrate slowly. As the stroke gets smaller, for denser passages or for softer playing, the movement will shrink. Continue to utilize the wrist motion throughout the full range of the stroke, and be sure to keep the elbow still. If the elbow is flailing in and out opposite the stroke, you are working against yourself and losing efficiency. Just as with any new technique, comfort will come with repetition and time. One unique challenge in teaching the marching bass drum is splitting rhythms. Most bass drum parts are written as split parts. This means that all of the notes that all of the bass drummers are to play are written together in one part, and the performers are expected to only perform the notes assigned to their drum. Let's take a look at a split bass drum part so you can see what I mean. The first note here is on the lowest space and is for the largest bass drum. In a 5-person bass line, this drum is typically called drum 5. Drum 4 plays next, followed by drums 3, 2, and 1, and the measure ends with 2 more notes for drum 2. To begin practicing this measure, I would make sure all of the students can count the entire rhythm together. This ensures that they understand what it should sound like when properly executed. Second, I would ask each student to count only their own part with a metronome. This ensures that they know which part of the rhythm they are to play. It can be very helpful to have each bass drummer highlight their notes throughout a piece of music. This will allow them to focus on their own rhythms and not mistakenly play someone else's part. Once each student is comfortable with their own counts, attempt to perform the complete rhythm as written. At first, encourage the students to focus solely on their own part. If they wait to hear the person before them play, the rhythm will undoubtedly slow down. Bass drummers must anticipate, not react. After the rhythm is solidly performed, work for evenness between the different performers. A great way to introduce split rhythms is with the bass drum part to 8 on a hand. The first 2 measures split eighth notes down and then up the drums. In measure 3, the count structure is the same, but each performer is asked to play 2 16th notes on their count instead of 1 8th note. Measure 5 adds a 3rd note each time a performer plays, and measure 7 requires 4 notes per count. Building step by step in this way allows the students to practice splitting dense rhythms, but keeps each player's count structure simple. Explore some of the other bass drum parts that I have notated here. Then, find a few other percussionists to try to split some rhythms. When playing with others, work for evenness of rhythm and volume. It's very difficult to get 5 bass drummers to play a smooth, connected line across all of the drums. Use your ears and encourage your students to always do the same. Accompanying this lesson, I've included 2 short drumline pieces that you can use to explore more marching battery music. With a young drumline or with students in a middle school who are preparing for the jump to high school marching band, I would begin with a heavy rotation of exercises. After the students are comfortable performing these exercises with the marching snare, tenor, and bass drum techniques, move to the drumline pieces and make some music. Have fun and good luck.